This is Dan Bolen, and I'm your host for the podcast, The Courage to Be Courageous, where people can come from all over the United States and hear stories of individuals that have walked through their fear and also have been able to do it with the courage in their life and to be their authentic self. And also, we have stories and podcasts from organizations that are fighting for LGBTQ rights. And we'll be interviewing more of those in the near future as well. We have a very fascinating guest today. It's Hilary Taylor. And let me tell you how Hilary Taylor and I met. My partner John and I were doing a ski trip in Telluride, Colorado. And we happened to meet Hilary. There was an open house there that John and I decided we wanted to look at. And Hilary was the realtor there. And so we were talking, and Hilary, tell me how we met and what you remember about it, because I think it's kind of humorous.
Oh, Dan, I love this story.
By the way, Hilary, thank you for my podcast. I want to welcome Hilary Taylor there. I go right into how we met.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing the podcast.
Dive right in.
I just dive right in. That's true.
We met in Telluride at the Madeline in a residence. You said you got my card, my real estate card. And so you called me and said, can we go see that 2-bedroom that's on the market? And I said, absolutely. I'll meet you up there in about 20 minutes. And when we met, I just felt an immediate bond. And if I could be so bold, I really do believe that I was meant to meet you in my life. You've been such a gift.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And so, well, that's completely how I feel. And so meeting you and John, we just had a great rapport, and the real estate was the real estate. But at the same time, I just felt a connection to you. And when I believe I might have mentioned that my father had passed recently. And you said, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. And then you wanted to share with me about your story of coming out and the book that was being released, I believe last year. And I was very interested in that because my father had come out when he was 60. And I couldn't have been closer to him as a person before and after. We grew together. So hearing your story, if I could be so bold as to say maybe some divine intervention of us meeting, and maybe my dad sent you to me after he couldn't be here, so for our friendship and just the chance to chat about these very personal things that have happened and the similar stories of.
And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I want to make a comment there because she asked me what I did, and I was joking, and I said, well, I ran drugs from here to Colombia. And she reminded me of that yesterday, which I said, by the way, that's a joke. And then we were talking about my book, and I did not know until she told me that her father came out as gay late in life. And I want to make a comment here for our listeners. This, I think, will be such a powerful story because there may be those in our audience, our podcast, listening to our podcast, that may have a hard time accepting one of their parents who comes out. Or maybe they've accepted him, but maybe they have questions about it, and maybe they would like to ask questions about it. So this is really about me interviewing Hilary as an adult child who totally came out, or her father totally came out to her and her brother, and the impact it had on her life and the impact it had on his life. So that's kind of what I wanted to say for those that are listeners here. I think you'll find it inspiring and powerful. So tell me a little bit about your life with your dad and how things and how you began to realize that he was gay, because there really was there's no way that you assumed he was gay. But anyway, tell the story of how all of that came to be.
Yes. Well, I had a very happy childhood. My father traveled a lot with work. My mom was the main child care provider, but weekends with my dad were always something to look forward to. For 10 years, it was just me. I was an only child, begging for a sibling. I wanted a sister when I was 5, and I got a brother when I was 10. So that was exciting.
Well, you got half right. You got the sibling, but
yes,
a different
I was
one.
very grateful.
Yes, I got.
And my
that.
brother and I are very, very close, despite the age difference of 10 years. My brother and I are very, very close. We talk every day. It's one of my favorite people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it was mowing the lawn with Dad and going to a flower nursery to pick out flowers. And my parents were very social. And then, of course, my brother came along. It was very convenient. I was kind of a second mom to him and a live-in babysitter and I did my own babysitting. I just love, being around kids. I had lots of time growing up with my dad's parents, who I adored, Jean and Jack Witzleben.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going to trips to the beach with my parents and grandparents and playing tennis and visiting them where they lived in Florida. So, and my dad grew up in Florida. He grew up in Coral Gables, and he went to Miami High School, and he has really great memories and funny stories from growing up and prom on the beach, et cetera, or after prom parties on the beach. And every time he told, a story of getting in trouble, maybe with some cherry bombs involved in lockers, it didn't matter if he was telling me this for the 55th time. I absolutely loved hearing it every time. He was just a goofball and class clown, if you will, but had a lot of leadership experiences in his growing up, class president. Then he went off to school in Mercer, in Macon, Georgia, and had a great experience there. I believe he majored in history. He always talked about his girlfriends too, like the most, prettiest girls in the class, if you will,
yes,
and showed me yearbook pictures of them. And my dad was always just like the life of the party. He loved Motown music, and especially the Big Chill soundtrack.
Yes.
He met my mom on a blind date when he was traveling with his fraternity. He went to her college, and a friend called my mom's sorority house and said, "Is anyone available to go on this double date with me tonight with this traveling SAE?" It was Charlie, my dad. And my mom said yes. And they went out, and I guess to a certain extent, it was love at first sight, but a little bit long distance for a while. But they met each other's families and eventually moved to Evanston, Chicago, and got married, and then moved down to Atlanta, Georgia, where I was born, Marietta, to be specific. My dad worked for Emory for 11 years in fundraising and development. And in terms of like my dad's hobbies and loves, what he was really known for, he was an art collector. He loved art. He was definitely the photographer of our family, and other families. Like they say, we have Charlie Witzleben to thank for all the photos of our family through the years. He loved the finer things in life, shopping and travel. And he was always the first and the last one on the dance floor. So he could have been hireable for it was such a great dancer that he was. Yes. And by the way, he grew up with an older brother and a twin fraternal brother. So, and my grandparents loved him. I mean, I don't think it's right to say they had a favorite, but Charlie was definitely the light of their life.
And I think what's interesting,
yes.
one of the things that Hilary was telling me yesterday, you would make lists together, and if one list was longer than the other, then that's the direction you went. And you made a confidence that your dad and you would make lists together. I think when you were considering getting married, You
Yeah,
made a
pros and
list.
cons.
Pros and cons. That's
yeah,
what it
even
was.
college. What do we love about this college? What do we, what are the pros and cons with each place?
Yeah.
And then also, moving out to later on in life, moving out to Telluride, leaving Chicago, pros and cons.
Yes.
And I included that in my eulogy for him.
Yes, you did. And you said it gave you confidence and security. And that's a great gift that your dad gave you. I think it's a powerful thing. So you had a great relationship with your dad. So did your brother. He had a good marriage to your mother. And they, I believe, were together 31 years. And then
they were married for 31 years.
And then they ended up going into a divorce, correct? They got divorced.
Yep. They got divorced after 31 years of marriage, and we just figured that they'd grown apart. I'll just speak for myself. I figured that they'd grown apart and they had a lot of life to live. And my dad was 60 at the time. And so, whatever made them happy, they were still my parents, and I still turned to both of them for different things. But I love them unconditionally. And so they, in North Carolina, I think this came up on another podcast of yours because I've done my homework and I've listened to a lot of them and I've really enjoyed them. But I was just going to say that in North Carolina, you have to be separated for a year. And so they were separated for a year, and the divorce was finalized. We lost my grandmother. My dad's mom passed away. And then about 3 years, maybe 2 or 3 years after the divorce was finalized, my dad said, "I'm going to come up and visit you in Chicago." And I said, "Well, why on earth are you doing that? It's January. It's freezing." And he goes, "Well, I want to take you for dinner. I want to spend the weekend with you." And I said, "Okay, that sounds wonderful. I love it. Perfect." So he came up. I had a studio apartment in the Gold Coast in Chicago, and he had an agenda that trip, and in a very loving way, he just wanted to go sit down, in the living room and tell me some very personal things of how his life was evolving. And he explained to me that in the past year, a couple years, he was starting a new season in life, and that he preferred the company of men. And I said, "Okay, that sounds great, Dad." And he never used the term gay. Very rarely did he use the term gay, and I don't think that it was anything personal. Maybe he was just kind of coming into his own identity and just figuring, he'd make up the words as he went along, and the delivery was very important to him. So I was not shocked, but at the same time, I was just surprised that I had not picked up on any of this. Or maybe I was a little shocked, Dan. I don't know. I think I joked with you about, my dad was my dad, and I was going to love him no matter what.
Right. He's
just such a remarkable man, and just has been the most wonderful father.
Yes.
But, I think it was one of those things that, how could I have not known? But at the same time, okay, let's move forward with this. I had a lot of questions. We were very thoughtful in our conversation, and it was, kind of just, he was very detailed that he was maybe curious about men starting maybe in his 40s, late 40s, but that he was loyal to my mom and still loved my mother very much. So it was kind of it wasn't an either or situation. It was an and situation.
Yes.
It was that he was happily married for 31 years. He had 2 beautiful children, and he was gay coming out.
And Hilary told me, I think, a interesting story. She said, "My gaydar is really good." And she said, I was shocked because she said, the only thing that I thought maybe could have made him in that direction is he would go school shopping because he wanted her to look her best. So he would go shopping and they would get school clothes together. Is that the way it went?
It was. I would always go back to school shopping with my dad. And I think it was like in fifth grade, I shared that with a group of girls. And one girl in particular said, and I grew up in Durham, North Carolina, and one girl in particular, I remember her saying, "Well, that's odd. You go shopping with your dad for clothes?" And I said, "Yeah, isn't it great? He's got great taste." I didn't play into her questioning it, but I did remember that conversation.
And it took a lot of courage on Charlie's part to come to his kids, and he had a great relationship with you and your brother, and to be able to tell that part of his life. And he was at that time doing fundraising for different organizations. So when he told you that he preferred preferred men and that it's a new season for him, he asked that you keep it quiet, correct? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yes, I think that, and I respected that decision. So he said he was the same person on the inside, which I completely agreed with him, and that because of his work and clients who he absolutely adored, and he didn't want to disappoint. He was full of fear that he would lose friends and professional relationships. To my knowledge, none of this came true. It was that unfounded fear that you talked about with some other guests of your podcast. But the fear kept us all in the closet, I'd say, for a good 6 to 7. I'm not quite sure exactly when we were kind of, it all happened very naturally, and I'm happy to share the details. But, he had not retired yet. After he retired, of course, he was also out, with a partner on Facebook, and because he loved the Facebook platform, he loved to share his travel advice and all of his adventures and photography. And but getting back to your point, we were somewhat all in the closet. I didn't talk to my best friends about it right away. So this was all in 2008. In 2008, I also had met my boyfriend, now husband. And so I wanted to share this with him. And one of the reasons why I'm attracted to my husband is he's just such a loving individual, with just live and let live mentality, just very accepting, and
he has a great taste in a wife.
Person.
He has a great taste in a wife. You're a beautiful
You're so
person.
kind. But now, Dan, let me share you that story, actually. So we were just falling in love. So, I've got a couple different stories. So in 2008, when he came to me in Chicago in that winter, I respected his wishes to just kind of keep it among ourselves. And of course, ask him any questions we had and just talk about it as a family, but not necessarily out in the open. He also invited me on a birthday trip for his 60th and my 30th to Africa, which I was floored. It was one of my favorite adventures ever. So I took 2 weeks off work and we flew to Africa in August, September timing. And of course, in 2008, that's when, the world was falling apart from the financial crisis. But we were in Africa, footloose and fancy free. The other thing that was happening is I just met my husband that year, boyfriend at the time, now husband. And he was living in Telluride, Colorado, and I was in Chicago. And so we had kind of started this, long distance love letter, kind of exploring if we were, a good fit and if we brought each other joy, my husband and I now. And it turns out we were falling in love while my husband was in Alaska. And then I was in Africa. And I remember writing letters to him and vice versa. So when I got back from Africa, and Carson and I were long distance, my now husband, I knew that I needed to come out to Carson. He had met my dad. He'd actually met my dad's friend, and my dad referred to his partners as friends. And he met my dad's friend, but nothing was said about it. We actually stayed the night at this bluegrass festival. And we didn't stay with them, but anyway, we had been visiting. So on one of the trips to Telluride, in the following winter, while we were dating long distance, I was nervous as all get out. I was like, I've got to tell Carson that my dad is gay, and he deserves to know. And there's nothing that I'm hiding from him, but I just want to let him know that my dad is gay. I love him no matter what, and I love you. And so I told him. We left the bar and we walked back in the snow, and we were in this gravel parking lot. And I said, "I'm just going to tell you something." He goes, "What? What is it? You're a nervous wreck." And I said, "My dad is gay." And he said, "Okay, I want to spend the rest of my life with you." I go, "What?" And he just, and then that was that.
Yeah,
that was
he
like
was
the
totally
best
accepting
response I'd ever heard in my life. And the feeling was mutual. And we decided to at least stop dating long distance after that and be in the same place.
Yes.
So I moved from Chicago to Telluride.
Well, he was
so
totally
that's one of my favorite stories.
Totally accepting as well too. And I want to make a comment here. I was able to meet Hilary and her husband and their two kids when we were in Telluride there. And tell us a little bit about your dad's relationship with your kids and how they really accepted him. And obviously, they're old enough to know that he's gay, but they totally accepted him. Tell us a bit how that all happened.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I am the mother. When I had my two boys, they're now 9 and 7, Vaughn and Hugh, I suddenly became not Charlie's daughter, but the mother of Charlie's biggest fans. And I thought I was his biggest fan, but no. And the feeling was mutual. My father was absolutely the best grandparent. He was having more and more fun as they got older, because a lot of the time it was just like, who is the parent here? My dad was just having so much fun, and I was the one that was having to discipline both my father and my children.
That happens a lot when we're parents.
Yes,
parents,
and so it was a little bit of a role reversal. Oh my gosh! And he would come to Telluride for months at a time to quote unquote help out. That it was more about, okay, when can I get the boys? Like, when do we get to go to the pool? When do we have a sleepover? And he introduced them to new foods, and he was so proud of that. Like, oh, well, I don't know if you know this, but Hugh loves salami. And thank you, Dad. Appreciate it. It was just, he was just ecstatic. And he was the best father and grandfather, of course. And he would take them for donuts in the morning and to the hot air balloon festival, and he just loved. And then of course there was the fact that they were all May babies. So my firstborn son was due right around my father's birthday, which he was ecstatic about. And he actually believes that they had a very deep bond. But Vaughn made other plans and came about a week early. But my father at that point wanted to always have a birthday celebration once they got to a certain age, for milestone birthdays, and just also every year birthdays. So just go on an adventure, like we had, to Africa. And so it started when my dad turned 70, and we went with my dad and his partner, Mike, at the time, my brother and his girlfriend, now wife, and the four of us, my husband and two boys. And we picked this beautiful spot in Costa Rica and just had a wonderful, wonderful week together. And then the following year, he came out during the summer to hang out with us in Telluride. And we chose two beautiful places in two separate places in Portugal to go. And so that was really fun. We were having so much fun, making so many wonderful memories. just as a family of Dad and his partner, and then my brother and his wife, and then the four of us. So that was a real highlight of our time with him.
Oh, you really had a wonderful father and a great relationship. And I think you shared with me yesterday when he came out as gay, the relationship got even stronger with you. Was it because of his honesty and openness and his courage to come out to you? Is that what made it stronger, Hilary?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, Dan. I realized that we did become even closer. And I realized that my dad was the same person, and I was still his biggest fan and the ultimate daddy's girl. But when he came out, it was just this relief to him. I could tell that he wasn't holding anything more inside. Like, there was nothing to hide. There was a freedom there. And then that developed into our deeper love and understanding of each other. And I respected him so much more that he had the courage to live his truth.
Oh, fantastic. Now, he obviously has passed on, which had to be obviously very grieving for the whole family. And you did a eulogy, I believe. Did he pass on with cancer? Did he have cancer? Is that what it was?
No, it was in the end. In the end, it was renal failure after a heart surgery gone wrong.
Okay, that's right. Okay.
But I'll tell you what, all of his organs were failing. And, I had never been through anything like this before. But my brother and I, we lived in Colorado. We live in Colorado now, sorry. And we never left his side after this heart surgery gone wrong. And he was very alert and very aware, but his body was failing him. And so for 4 months, for a couple months, he was a fighter. We were trying to get him better, back to his old lifestyle. And then he went to a rehabilitation facility, and he kind of went downhill from there, unfortunately. And then my brother and I immediately flew out again to be with him. And we all just made the difficult decision to with his palliative care doctors, to move him to hospice. And he just had such a beautiful spirit. The nurses all loved him. The doctor would come in, this beautiful doctor from South Africa, and she said, "Charlie, do you have any questions for me?" And he said, "Yes. How long have you seen anyone in my condition last?" I said, "Wow, that's a loaded question, Charlie. But I can tell you want to be informed." And so I can tell you that I've seen anywhere from 2 days of renal failure post not getting dialysis, because his body was deteriorating with dialysis, so he couldn't do that anymore. Shutting down, yes, thank you. And 2 to 14 days. And so my brother and I, that was, helpful for us to know. So, we're there and just holding his hand and rubbing his feet and laughing with him and telling him stories. And he was telling us stories and dictating letters to my sons, just beautiful memories in that first week. And watching the Olympics, because this was in March of 2022. So that said, my father, as a record breaker, lasted 34 days.
34 days. And he liked to play music too. He used to play music that the nurses would come in and say, "Where's that beautiful music coming from?" And look at the courage.
Yes, my father's
courage that he had, even when he was going to be passing on. He was still happy. He was still appreciative of his family. And that took a lot of courage on his part, and a lot of courage on your part too, Hilary. A lot of courage on your part.
Well, it was hard. It was hard being away from my family for so long, but he was my priority. We tried to get him better, and his favorite. He actually was planning for his funeral too in hospice. I hope that doesn't sound too dark, but he told us, make sure you play Rachmaninoff. I definitely want Rhapsody on a theme of Paganini. We were so late. So we were listening to these stories. Actually, if you don't mind, because I know I shared my eulogy with you, I'll just read a little passage from the eulogy if you'd like. Yeah.
That would be great. Let's share a little bit of that with us.
My brother and I would trade off spending the night at the ICU in hospice. And anyone who has ever slept at a hospital or has had a newborn knows it is not a good night's sleep, but it was worth it. After a cup of coffee, I would look at Dad again with loving eyes, and he would smile and give me a wink and tell me, quote, I love the start of each day. It's new and fresh. You set the tone for the day in the way that you wake up and decide to spread cheer. So to your point, Dan, I'll read this, just go on a little bit longer. So some mornings we would wake up and act like we were in a coffee shop playing morning jazz. Other mornings we were in a Broadway or a Motown mood. And towards the end, it was many of the songs we're hearing here today, including Rachmaninoff.
Wow.
Nurses would come in and ask, what is this beautiful music? And they would be transformed out of a hospital and into a different place. Dad and I would regularly look at each other, and no words needed to be spoken of the gratitude we felt. We watched the birds play, life slowed down, the ego diminished. Our conversations were at their purest form. We didn't know how it would turn out, so instead we focused on being present with one another. That's how I will remember the end. Peaceful.
Wow. Wow. What a loving father. Now that is powerful. I want to make a comment also in the eulogy that she wrote that I think is such a, a point of his strength that he had and his work ethic. This is a quote from Hilary in the eulogy. He found a fundraising career that came so naturally to him, and I have always admired his tremendous work ethic. He told me, your work comes from dedication, sincere effort, and sacrifice. Success does not just happen. And it said, wise words, Dad. It was second nature to him to make people's lives better and for each of us to think bigger. That's a powerful comment. And I asked Hilary yesterday 3 things. Give me 3 words to describe her dad. The 3 words, pick 3 words. What were the 3 words you came up with? Can you remember? And if not, I have them written down.
Yeah. I think I came up with more words because I don't follow the rules. What did I say?
Well, you said loving.
Yes, 100%.
He was loving. And he was generous with his time and love.
Yes.
And this, to me, the 3rd one, I think is the most powerful. Unconditional love. Mm-hmm. He gave you unconditional love. And you gave him all these 3 things back as well. You know, our parents mentor. We mentor what our parents teach us. He taught you love. And Hilary, you show love. He taught you generosity with your time and love. You show that as well. And you also show unconditional love. The 3 things that you picked out about your father are the 3 things that you embody. That's powerful for me. And the courage that your dad to be courageous and to be able to live his life as his authentic self and to be able to do it with grace, do it with dignity. He did it with humor. Is really a powerful statement for the rest of us to learn from. And we're so pleased to have you on the podcast today to realize that when your dad came out as his authentic self, as his real self, you loved him even more deeply and accepted him more deeply.
Yes.
And so did your family. And it's interesting because Hilary's, I always call her my spiritual dad because there's so many similar characteristics that her dad and I have. We love to dance.
Yes.
We love music. We love clothes. I love art. I love theater. So there's a lot of similarities there too.
Well, if I could interject, Dan, what I love about you, And after reading your book, it really spoke to me, The Courage to Be Courageous. I think I finished it in 24 hours. I couldn't put it down because I could relate so much to it. And your vulnerability, your voice, your honesty. I have never honestly read a more honest book in my life. And you were incredibly respectful, just like my dad would have been, in your memoir to everyone you've encountered in life. And I honestly, I have to admit that I felt like you were writing what could have easily been the book that my father never wrote.
Wow.
You know, we were church-going people. And so on a personal note, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Hardworking and a deep bond with your daughter.
Yeah. Yes.
Tiffany.
Yes. In fact, we were talking earlier, and I just got back from my daughter. I just got back from her yesterday, and she said, "Dad, I knew." She said, I said, "Well, how did you know that I was gay?" She said, "We'd go out to restaurants with Mom, and you always would watch the guys." So it's interesting. We think that our family doesn't know, but our family, many of them do know. even though we don't think they know. So it's been real powerful.
It's so true.
You've done such a wonderful podcast with me today, and I want those that are listeners on our podcast who have parents, some of their parents that have come out as gay, hopefully you'll be able to see that it can bring your bond closer to them. You know, when someone lives their authentic self and they're able to get through the fear and use the courage as Charlie did, as your dad did, they're able to even have more love because they're not dealing in a life that's not them. They become their authentic self, and I think they give authentic love then, even deeper love. Hilary, it's such a gift having you on. Thank you for your compliments about my book. I really appreciate. I would love to have known Charlie. I would have loved to have known Charlie, and we could see if Charlie was here. We could see who was the best dancer.
Oh my goodness, that would be really fun.
We'd probably dance all night.
That is amazing. Well, and thank you, Dan, for having me. I really am. I am a podcast connoisseur, and I never thought I'd be on one. And this has just been such a treat.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Go ahead.
My advice for anyone going through this, because I know you like to wrap up asking folks that as well, is
yes, I do.
Just like when our parents were raising us, they were giving us a lot of grace. And so there's a role reversal with adult children. And so my advice would be give your parents grace and be patient and let them figure out who they are, just like they did when we were growing up. So that's my little advice.
Oh, wow, that's powerful. Yeah. They want, and good parents want them to figure out who they are, and yet we need to give the same grace back to our parents and let them figure out who they are. And that way, both the adult child and their father or mother can live to be their authentic self. What a great story. Thank you, Hilary. I love your beautiful smile every time I see you. Thank you for being on my podcast.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
Have a great day.